Hi folks, in this question we're doing here is putting together the equity section. Now there could be one or two different presentations, but this is the one I selected of the ones I've seen. I think it's probably more true to what we see normally in practice, but let's go through it and discuss. And in your question, you were given a series of accounts, and all you had to do was put it together in good form in the equity section of the balance sheet. So again, we would start off with the three-line title, and we'd start off because we do have share capital with contributed capital, all right? And we'd start off with our share capital, and it would consist of our preferred shares first and then our common. So in the question, we know that preferred shares are no par. There's a $2 per share dividend, unlimited authorization for shares. They're cumulative and fully participating. Just so that you know at this point, we may not have covered it yet in your course, but when we say that preferred shares are participating, that's an opportunity for the shareholder who holds those participating preferred shares to get more than their $2 per share dividend throughout the year. But later on in our course, not too long from now, we'll be talking about those kinds of preferred shares. We know there's 227,000 issued and outstanding, and we know the paid-in capital on the preferreds is 168,000. We also know that we have some common shares here, and the common shares are again no par, unlimited, and we have 45,000 shares issued, and they told us that 44,900 are outstanding, and that's because 100 of them are treasury shares. With the treasury shares, you'll remember that treasury shares are shares that have been bought back from investors by the company, and the company intends to reissue them. Now remember, treasury shares are not that common here in Canada at all, but they are used in many other countries around the world, and depending on where you decide to work, you may see reference to them. You even see some financial statements of corporations who own Canadian-based companies. When they do their financial statements for all of their holdings in a consolidated basis, they may show treasury shares. So again, it is important that you know that they exist. The other thing we have here, we did talk in class about common shares subscribed. Those are shares that have been signed up for by investors, but perhaps not fully paid up yet. So in other words, here investors have subscribed and said that they would like to buy 100 shares, and the value of the subscription, or the total amount of money that we expect to get, is $9,000 for those 100 shares. But there's an amount that the investors have not yet paid, and that's $3,000. So you'll see at net we have our common shares subscribed at net based on the value of the shares that have actually been paid up, which is $6,000. Now, you'll also see here that we have fractional share rights. Fractional share rights is a concept that was mentioned in this question, but I'll just explain it to you briefly. Let me just see if I can throw up a little Word document here and see if we can go through a little calculation. Not bringing it up for some reason. Let me see. Okay, now we've got it going. So let's just talk a little bit about fractional share rights. And just explain the concept. Sometimes they'll mention a lot of different kinds of things in a question that you may not be familiar with. But once I explain the concept, you'll get it. Let's say you hold 50 shares, 50 common shares, and a company decides that they're going to pay out or issue a 5% share dividend. Well, what that means is that you now will hold 50 times 0.05. You will hold an additional 2.5 shares, right? Additional. Well, you also know that you can't have 52.5 shares. You either have 52 shares or 53 shares, right? So what's going to happen here is that you've got this 0.5, which is what we call a fractional or partial share. So what the company normally does is they would normally pay you the value of that half a share. So let's say that the shares were trading at $17 a share at the date of declaration. So don't forget, it's at the declaration date that we value the share dividend. So that means that for a half a share, you would get deposited into your account, okay, $8.50 into your account for that half a share. So you would get an extra, 2 shares, okay, and the value of that would be $34, right? $17 a share times 2 extra shares, right? Plus you'd get an extra $8.50. So, and that would be cash deposited to your account. So that's normally what would happen. So we refer to the value of that partial share or that half share, okay, as a fractional share right. Now, the other thing a company could do isn't as common. Instead of paying you cash, they can make you buy up additional fractional share rights to get a full share. So in other words, what could happen here is they may turn around and say, well, our policy is not to pay you out any cash on a fractional share. So there is a market where these fractional shares trade. So what you might want to go in and do is hang on to your half share, and maybe you think that the market's going to do well for these shares, and you might decide that you want to go out and buy some more partial shares to either make up a full share or to make up as many shares as you want to buy. So the idea is that you can go out into the marketplace. There is a market where fractional shares trade and buy up. That's where you get fractional share rights. So the right that you hold is going to allow you to buy full shares. So if you bought up an additional right, and that right would give you the entitlement to half a share, you can combine it with the half a share you've got and get a full share for $17. But those rights, the right is actually to buy full shares, okay, depending on how many rights you buy. So all we're saying here in our question, all right, all we're saying here in our question is that there are some fractional share rights out there, and they're valued at $9,200. So they'll allow you to buy $9,200 worth of full shares. Okay, so those rights again are things that trade in the marketplace, and you can buy them in order to shore up your ownership share so that you can get a full share or more than a full share if you wanted to buy rights, okay, in order to get more shares when you decide to exercise those fractional share rights. All right. Now, we can also have other contributed capital, and in this particular case, they told us that we had other contributed capital from common share retirement, which was $18,900. So we have total contributed capital of $1,552,100. We also, in our question, have retained earnings, and the retained earnings are $653,000. And we also have a reserve here, which is like your AOCI, your accumulated other comprehensive income. All right, and that they've given us as $150,500. Now again, it's a reserve for unrealized exchange gains. So because it's a gain, we're going to add it in, right? So we would add to our total contributed capital account our retained earnings and our reserves, also known as accumulated other comprehensive income, or AOCI, to give us total equity of $2,355,600. So now what do we have? Don't forget, in this question we had treasury shares. And don't forget, the common presentation for treasury shares is to show those treasury shares as a reduction just below your total contributed capital, retained earnings, and your reserves, or AOCI. So it usually is not a contra account to this account. Normally it's shown right at the bottom. So you see here we had 45,000 shares issued, but only 44,900 outstanding. That's because there were 100 shares being held in treasury. So of these 45,000, the company bought back 100 and they're hanging on to them. So we normally show that contra equity account as a very bottom line here before we total our shareholders' equity, which would be at 2,347,000. So now, just here, I forgot to mention that when we had the subscription receivable, we mentioned this in class as well, that some organizations may classify it as an asset, but in our course, we're going to classify it with its more popular presentation, which is as a contra equity account, and we're going to subtract it directly from the common shares subscribed. Some companies, what they might do is they might take this account. The other presentation you might see is to have it right between this treasury share account and the total. But that does not affect your total equity. Your total equity would still be the same. So you have an option. You can deduct it directly from your common shares subscribed, deduct the receivable from that to show your shares, your common shares subscribed at the total amount of cash that's been paid for those shares to date. Or you can show it between your treasury shares and your total shareholders' equity. Up to you. But this is a more popular presentation than what I'm showing you here. So this concludes our short video on preparing the equity section of the balance sheet with a short little lecture here on fractional share rights.